All right, I want to bring now in Reed Cowan on set with here on CBS News 24/7. A lot of news going on today. We just heard that massive press conference from President-elect Trump, but we're also following the developments of the funeral procession for former President Jimmy Carter. That's going on right now in Georgia. We want to show you live pictures of the former president's casket being loaded there onto the plane at Dobbins Air Reserve Base. We just heard the 21-gun salute. Now, immediately following that, the U.S. Army's Maneuver Center of Excellence Band will be playing a song there. Let's look in right there as it's just been a remarkable read for me to watch this entire morning, the events. Every moment there is a special ceremony, and it's really a tribute to the legacy of this former president.
Yes, in the moments leading up to what you were looking at live at Dobbins Air Reserve Base, there was quite a spectacle and quite a scene. 21-gun salute, arms and honors, 4 ruffles and flourishes, and then right before his body was lifted there, they played the song, the Christian hymn, Nearer My God to Thee. They lifted his body on the first note of that hymn. So, once his body is loaded onto that plane in what is called Special Air Mission 39, his body will be flown to our nation's capital. Let's pause for a second and listen to Nearer My God to Thee.
And you are looking at live pictures from Dobbins Air Reserve Base there in Georgia. The family and friends of former President Jimmy Carter following the late president's casket onto that plane there. They will be taking that plane to Washington, D.C. to Joint Base Andrews, where it will then be carried to lie in state in Washington, D.C. Now, we are just kind of witnessing the ceremonies that take place when there is a late president and their casket being loaded onto that United States plane there. And Reed, it's so remarkable, the quiet moments of these ceremonies. You hear the traditional hymns, you hear the traditional songs, you see the color guard, you see all of that. But then it's sort of striking to see the moments of silence also within these ceremonies.
Yeah, dignified by design. Moments before we cut into this ceremony, they played Hail to the Chief. And as we watch members of the Carter family and people with the Carter organization get on that plane to accompany the body of the former president, it bears some significance to think about the fact that Hail to the Chief is played for presidents who are living, but also in ceremonies leading up to the interment of presidents. The lyrics, not often sung, are, as we say, Hail to the Chief chosen for this nation. Hail to the Chief, we salute you one and all. Hail to the Chief, we pledge cooperation in the proud fulfillment of a great and noble call. So these ceremonies, whether you hear the lyrics or not, fall in that same sense of dignity and that same sense of reverence for the office of the presidency.
And to me, what's so striking about these ceremonies, Reed, is that, President Carter lived after his presidency a relatively humble life. I mean, his life was dedicated to service, both within the United States, but then also abroad. I mean, he won the Nobel Peace Prize in 2002. I mean, his legacy is so much about what happened after he left the White House as much as it was while he was in the White House. And, he was famous for wearing blue jeans around the White House. He was famous for kind of bringing the status of that more down to earth as sort of the people's president in so many ways. And so it's just a stark contrast to the very formal ceremonies that we're seeing him, all of the honors that are bestowed upon the late president. And it's emotional to see. It's quite beautiful to see the tradition. These ceremonies are rooted in history and honor, and just see the respect from not only lawmakers, people in Washington right now, former lawmakers, but also people within Plains, Georgia, within the community there. I remember after he passed away, members of the community said, the former president actually requested that businesses in Plains, Georgia stay open because he knew about the attention that his passing would bring to that community and wanted them to benefit economically from all the visitors that are going to come and the attention being paid to Plains, Georgia. And so it's remarkable to see the contrast of just how down to earth this man was, and then the formality of the events to come, not only today, but in the next few days. Well,
and as Skyler Henry, CBS News correspondent, reported on this very broadcast, Jimmy Carter, who was known by the people of Georgia as Mr. Jimmy, flew coach often. He preferred to fly coach. So to your point, and scaffolding off of that, as we look at this United States of America plane, we are aware that this is a much different flight than Jimmy Carter took as he flew all around the world to forward the initiatives of an operation that began after he left office. Liz, arguably, Jimmy Carter had more success after he left the presidency than during his time in office. Of course, his time in office was marked as a time of peace. You just heard President-elect Donald Trump criticize the former president for some of his decisions. But as Jimmy Carter noted in an interview that aired this morning on NPR, he said, while I was president, we didn't have to fire one missile, and peace was on the planet during my time as president. But he also stated, Liz, that it was his work after the presidency that he felt held more power because he worked in coalition building and he worked in community building, not only in the United States, but all over the country.
And it's been interesting hearing from the family of Jimmy Carter, his grandchildren and his children, talking about not only his legacy as president and all, of course, the work that he did after he left the White House, but also his relationship with his wife, Rosalind, and how deeply committed they were to their community, to each other, to religion. And, in fact, he said when he took over the White House that he was going to pledge the American people that he was going to be honest. And so many of his decisions were rooted in his deep commitment to religion. I mean, he walked the walk, he talked the talk, and was rooted in his ideals there. And it's been fascinating to kind of reflect back on his legacy as president and, of course, his legacy after he left the White House. And I know there was a lot of criticism to Jimmy Carter after he left the White House and Ronald Reagan took over there. But now reflecting back, it's interesting to hear from historians that maybe the legacy of his presidency is seen differently now that time has passed.
Right. And now the family of Jimmy Carter and his associates have boarded that plane. Can you imagine as they take their seats and they see that military band now departing and clearing the runway for a takeoff, and knowing that their father's body will make its last flight to our nation's capital with all of the honor and dignity that his service and his legacy is due. Jimmy Carter noted in the years after his presidency that when he left the White House, he was surprised to find out that his businesses had gone downhill. He was $1 million in debt. And it was with the penning of his first book and the launching of the Carter Foundation that he was able, as he put it in his own words, to dig himself out of that hole. He did not attend to his private businesses while he was in the White House. They dwindled. And so afterwards, he went back home to his home in Georgia, and he had to start again. And instead of starting again to make himself a wealthy man, Jimmy Carter went about the work of making people more wealthy using the value of service. One of my favorite things about him is his work building homes side by side with Rosalind Carter with Habitat for Humanity.
And that plane there getting ready to depart from Dobbins Air Reserve Base there in Georgia in just a few moments there. Once the aircraft is ready, they will depart and go to Joint Base Andrews in Washington, D.C. That's going to happen at approximately 2 p.m. Eastern time. And then they will be transferred with the ceremony to another hearse. And immediately following that ceremony, the motorcade will go to the airfield for the U.S. Navy Memorial in Washington, D.C. So a lot of sequence of events going on today. Again, we've been remarking on the different ceremonies that take place, each moment marked by tradition, by history, by honor. And there now you're just looking at the plane getting ready to take off. We got a chance to see some of Jimmy Carter's family and friends and dignitaries with the Carter Foundation and the Carter Center there in Athens, Georgia. I want to send it now to Skyler Henry. Skyler, you have been following the chain of events all morning long. We just saw the family of Jimmy Carter get onto that plane there, that plane getting ready to take off. What struck you about the events that just took place?
Well, the fact that at the end of the day, yes, he was president, but this is a father, this is a grandfather, a great-grandfather, and that these are family members that, despite Jimmy Carter living to 100 years, they will miss him. And I think that for as much as he's represented for the globe in the name of humanitarian rights and activism, and also what he's done in the name of democracy for so many different countries and territories around the world, he really did mean so much to that family and to the state of Georgia and to Plains, Georgia as well. When we were here on Saturday listening to that special service that was here at the Carter Center, we heard from Jason Carter, the grandson of Jimmy Carter and Rosalind Carter, as well as Chip Carter, one of the children of the Carters, and they shared anecdotes about their time growing up with the late president. One of the ones that sticks out to me is that time that Chip failed Latin and relied on the late president to go away, go out to the family business, study the Latin book, and then come back. And then Chip was able to take that final exam that he flunked prior to their winter break, and he was able to pass that course with a 100, and that was because of the help of his father, Jimmy. And so I think it's things like that, right? When you take in the anecdotes, the stories from those family members, but then also the people here at the Carter Center. We were able to speak with one of the groundskeepers here, Buddy Smith, who helped build the actual Carter Center back in 1982. He eventually started to work here in 1986, and he talked about what it was like and how this place lit up every time that Jimmy and Rosalind came in to the center in and of itself. And they actually built the rapport so much so that they would go to Atlanta Braves baseball games. They would share time in the stands and also go down to the field, meet with some of the star players. And really that's the sort of relationships that the Carters shared with so many here in this state, here at the Carter Center. You know, Reed, I heard you point this out. They talked about him, calling him Mr. Jimmy, but really he was the type that they would see at the convenience store, at the dollar store, at the grocery store, at the ice cream store to get that famous peanut ice cream, and obviously in church as well, at Maranatha Baptist Church, to hear those famous sermons on those Sundays. And I think that that is something that so many people that we have heard from here in Plains and also in Atlanta say that they will miss the most. Yes, they are grieving the fact that their neighbor is no longer here, but they're also so proud of what he stood for, what he was able to accomplish, and what he really was a symbol of in so many ways as it relates to democracy, as it relates to peace, and as it relates to solving many of the health crises that we've seen around the world.
Yeah, it's been remarkable to look back at his life there in Plains, Georgia, Skyler, and looking at his relatively modest home there. I mean, this is a Nobel Peace Prize winner who went and met with major world leaders. This is a former president, but yet everybody in town knew him and had a fun story of interacting with him, and his commitment to his community that was so committed to him throughout his whole life. I'm curious if you had a chance, what you've learned from just some of the people that were in Plains, Georgia, and also there at the Carter Center. Any interesting stories that stuck out to you?
I'm thinking of one of the senior advisors that was here at the Carter Center that we spoke with, that talked about a lot of the work that she and the president were able to do overseas. But yeah, the mission was there, but then she thought about the times in which she wanted to build her own family. And one of those times included trying to adopt a child, a daughter from Guatemala, and how she was struggling to get through with that process. And she asked for President Carter's help, and he helped. And she was able to adopt that daughter, who is now a teenager. And really just the work that they were able to do on an intimate level. Again, I talked about how these Carters, Jimmy and Rosalind, meant so much to so many people, but it's when you hear stories like that, obviously as a former president, you could sort of live any of the lives you can so choose. You can write your books, make your millions, live in a big city, the Atlantas, the Washington, D.C.s, New York City, but they chose to live back in Plains. And I think that is something that is really touching when you think about the Jimmy Carter story and what Plains meant to him, their family, and what they were able to do from that small town, yes, here in Atlanta, but also around the world as well.
Skyler Henry, thank you so much as we await what is called Special Air Mission 39, carrying the body of Jimmy Carter to Washington, D.C., where he will lie in state there at the U.S. Capitol, along with his family members. We want to let you know that CBS News 24/7 and CBS News will have full coverage throughout the day, marking this moment in American history. American history is a book that is still being written.